Well,
All
welcome
right.
everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. We're just a couple minutes after the hour here. Thanks all of you for being here. I'm Karen Gimnig, and I'm the Communications Director for the Co-Housing Association, and Karen Hoskins with us, and she's the Executive Director, and we're the two staff that keep the association kind of rolling. We have, I think, a record number of board members here and for a web chat.
Sorry.
And I wanted to hand things for a minute to Mary to talk to sort of from that perspective of the board.
Hi, thanks everybody for being here. And Karen and Karen, thank you so much for your work on all these web chats, the Simple series. Just so you all know, these two have been working so hard and come up with these great ideas that they're following through on and bringing to the community, the greater co-housing community. While I have the floor, I wanted to make a plug for supporting the organization. We would like to keep being able to do what we're doing, keep doing these web chats that are really helpful to communities, but we can only keep doing them if we get support. They cost money. So if you can go on Coho US afterwards, or even right now, and donate something to help with the effort, that would be wonderful.
Thanks, Mary. I appreciate you. The program for tonight is we're going to welcome Joren Bass from UDP in Portland, and he's going to talk about what's going on in the development world relative to this new reality we're all living in. And then there will be time for some questions as well. So Joren, I'll turn it to you.
Great. Thanks. Well, this is fun. I actually recognize like at least 3/4 of you or more. And the Zoom tip, if you haven't learned this yet in the last 2 weeks, in the upper right corner, you can hit grid view and then you can see everybody. So if you haven't done that, that's good because then you can see the whole community. So turn on the grid view. So we, Urban Development Partners, myself, we're working with about 6 different communities right now that are in the development phase. And so we've been having this sort of conversation with all of them of sort of what now? What does this mean? What's changed? What's different? And it's sort of having these conversations with Katie, who I know is on here. She's just got her logo on there, but she's here. Katie and I have been doing sort of evening chats with all of our communities that we're working with together to talk a little bit about the development world, the construction world right now, what we're seeing out there. And so out of those community chats came the idea to put one out for everybody. So that's sort of the genesis of this. And so I'm happy to do it. I've made notes from the different community chats that we've had of some questions that have come up, and I'll go through those topics, and then I'm happy to take other questions. So real quick background, Urban Development Partners, we're a developer based in Portland. Many of you know us. We've been a part of co-housing for, 8 or 9 years now after developing PDX Commons. And we've been a part of the national conferences and sponsors and whatnot. But the reason I get background is outside of co-housing, we also do other investment development. So we build multifamily and office and other types of development, mostly urban projects in Portland, and well, now we're kind of regional in the West Coast. And I mention that because we have a lot of projects in all kinds of phases right now, from early development through and projects in construction right now. Our co-housing projects are mostly in development or about to start construction, but I can speak to what's going on the ground with our projects that are being built today. We have some 6-story heavy timber office that's just completing. We have some large multifamily that are completing. We even have one boutique hotel that's going to complete in the fall. So that's a whole nother story. We'll talk. I want to talk, a little bit about just general what we're seeing from the construction side. And then I'll get kind of into development and kind of work towards thoughts that we're steering our communities towards to how to navigate this time. So just in general, obviously it's different. Every state is different right now with what can be done and what cannot. In Oregon, we're still under construction on our projects. Our contractors are showing up. We're probably running about a 60% staff on projects from our subcontractor standpoint. We're moving a little slower, but generally things are still being built. We haven't had any supply chain issues yet, but that's our condition in Oregon. We have our Spokane co-housing Haystack Heights. We're ready to break ground almost any day, and Washington is under a total lockdown on construction. So each state is handling construction different. California, where we've got projects in development, they're allowing housing to move forward with construction because they see that as a vital need out there. So it's different across the board, obviously. But in general, the news is contractors want to work just as everybody else wants to work and is finding ways to work. We've found that our general contractors and our subcontractors have been surprisingly nimble in figuring this out and how to keep their crews productive, which has been great because it's not just for us, but it's for them. They have bills to pay as well, and they want to be on the job. So we're seeing the construction industry in general being really, like I say, really nimble and creative about how to keep their people safe and keep jobs moving. In talking with our general contractors, the owners of some of the firms, they literally have to wake up every morning and figure out what the new regulation is and put it in place on the job site. But they're doing that and keeping people moving. So that's the good news. I think, obviously there's varying levels out there of how different contractors are, able to handle with it. But for the most part, they're trying to work with it and keep their people safe and productive. We have, like I say, we have yet to see a slowdown in construction from a supply chain side. I'll talk a little later. We're beginning to prepare for that on some of our projects that are going to break ground, say this summer or in the fall. We're thinking about other strategies to deal with that. But so far, that hasn't been an issue for us yet. So the other issue, there's really kind of three parts of projects that are in development. There's how are you going to deal with construction, that's down the road. How are you going to deal with financing, and how are you going to deal with building the community, getting the community going? And we'll get to the community, but the next piece on the line is financing. And so this was a tricky area. Last week most of our team spent a good portion of the week on the phone with all our lenders, talking to them about what they're seeing. Are they are they going to slow down lending? Are they panicked? In general, we've had a really good response from our construction lenders, lenders that were working on loans in the near future for construction, as well as lenders that are actively lending on construction projects, and also lenders that are holding mortgages on our properties. They're all up and functioning, and they all have capital to lend. So this is much different than what we saw in 2008, 2009, where there wasn't capital to lend. We're in a different situation here, which is the good news at this point. So again, our project in Spokane, Haystack Heights, we're preparing to break ground within a couple of weeks. So we've been in almost daily talks with our lender, finishing up the final loan documents. And last week we had a big conversation with them about, do they want to move forward? And their real question is, how's the community? You know, our folks, you know, the future home buyers, are they getting nervous, or are they dropping out? And how is UDP as the guarantor on the loan feeling about the project? And we all basically went around the room and said, everybody's still behind it 100%. And so that was the same for the lender. They were still 100% committed to the loan, moving forward with it. In their mind, you know, this is still a, you know, relatively short-term issue that we're dealing with. And if the community is still behind it and the developers behind it, they're willing to move forward. And we're seeing that in other conversations that we're having on development projects that are, say, 3 months out from breaking ground, or 4 or 5 months, where we're still in relatively early conversations with lenders. They're still wanting to look at projects and look for ways to move it forward. So from the lending side, it's good. Now, if there's any bright side to the situation we're in now, it's where interest rates have gone. Obviously, the federal rate has dropped significantly, which doesn't mean that construction loans are at 0% yet, but most construction loans are either tied to the prime rate or the LIBOR rate that's out there. But that has dropped as well. So for our projects that are about to break ground, from when we usually start working on the construction loan roughly 3 to 4 months before we start a construction. For our projects that are getting close to breaking ground, they're probably saving somewhere around $75,000 in lending costs, financing costs, because of the rate drops that are out there. So that is one of the positive sides out there right now for projects that are able to move forward in the near future. They're going to see a benefit from the financing side from where the rates are. So that's something to remember as we talk about steps to move forward and reasons to move forward and reasons that you're talking to your community to move forward. You know, we're going to potentially see a time here when we coming out of this, when there's an easing on the construction labor market and construction supply market. And if tying that with some lower interest rates could be a great time to build, almost a better time to build than we had earlier or last year. So that's what we're seeing on the lending side is a willingness out there from lenders to keep moving forward and look at deals and look at projects. So the real question for most communities, and I assume most of you are sort of in developing communities right now. I know some of you are, because I recognize your faces or part of your projects. Is really how does the community move forward at the right pace? Where should the community plan to be when we come out of this, and what steps do we take now to be there? Because really, the best thing a community can do is create a plan. So that would be that's one of my big tips. Is if your development committee hasn't gotten together to talk about a plan yet, you should. I would guess most communities have at least started to have that discussion. But you know, the best way to put the project in the best position coming out of this is to develop a plan and think about what steps are going to get you there when you know, things lighten up or the project's in a place they're ready to start construction. So we've been meeting with our communities no more than bi-weekly. A lot of our communities have gone to weekly development calls because, as you know, things have been changing here pretty quickly every day. And so depending on the community, we've moved some of our calls to weekly calls. And part of this is really focusing on that plan and communicating it to the members. It's not just in the development team, but it's getting out to the broader community, because we want all the community members to understand the steps and understand the plan and where we're going to be when we come out of this. And that will directly tie into the marketing aspects of what we'll talk about in a minute. But probably the most critical piece to understand for this plan is the cash flow for the community, because that's immediately one where individually every community member probably has the most unease is, how much more money are we going to need to put into this? Can we weather this time? If we're not going to be able to bring new members on who are going to step up and help contribute to the development costs, how can we continue to move forward? So what we're doing with our communities is going back and taking a deeper pass at the cash flow, what we call our cash flow analysis. So we're looking at, what development monies are in the bank, what are the monthly costs that we anticipated for our typical schedule, and how do we need to adjust that? So, they're in the development process. You're never spending money that you don't need to spend. We're not assuming that there's money we can just cut, but we can certainly adjust when we spend money. So with that plan, what's critical is understanding the critical path. So what is it, depending on where your community is, that is driving your schedule? So for some communities, it's figuring out a way to continue the design workshops. There's some communities that might be getting past a land use submittal, or finishing the design development, or getting to a point where it can go in for permit. It's different for every community, kind of where they are in the development process, but really working with your project manager and your development team and understanding the critical path. What are the pieces that we have to keep going if we want to stay on a reasonable schedule, and understanding what costs need to be spent to do that. So that could be, costs for your design team, your architects, or your engineers, or some sort of other due diligence on the property, civil, geotech, or something like that. If there's something that is part of the critical path, then we analyze that in the cash flow and try to allocate money to keep the critical path going. And then there might be some things that we'll need to do before we start construction, but we don't have to do them today or this month. We can say, okay, well, we can delay that cost, or we can ask the design team to not worry about that piece. Let's figure that out down the road and help control their billings and the community's cash flow. So it's really important to look at it from that level. So you're looking at the schedule and the critical path and that cash flow, and that's really reassuring to be able to communicate that to the community at large, because we've seen it with all our communities. There are some folks who are less affected, but there's certainly a lot of folks in your community who have seen their investments or 401k significantly drop, and their next question in their mind is, well, when's our next cash call, and will I be able to make that? And so we believe that the communities need to focus on this cash flow and really be able to, one, justify what that cash call is, or stretch it out and give members some flexibility for that cash call. So I would encourage all of you to be working with your development team to really look at that and analyze it. And with that, the other tip would be to definitely talk with your professional partners. Communities, sometimes if you're not closely tied with your developer, or some communities do the project management in-house, if you're not closely tied to your professionals, sometimes there's a reluctance to communicate with them. Because I can tell you, all your professionals, they should be focused on your goals and willing to help you brainstorm on how to manage that cash flow and manage the project and the schedule. And so it's really important to have these conversations with the design team, or whatever, depending on what stage you're in. Usually it's led by your architect, and they're communicating with your engineers. But could be with your developer if your developer is not closely connected with the community, and just talk about this and say, this is our number one issue. We want to understand, the cash flow here through July, let's say, and we want to, if we aren't able to recruit new members, how can we continue to move forward with what we have? So it's really important. So it's everybody's knows how to use Zoom at this point, so there shouldn't be any barriers to talking with your professionals. They can often adjust their workflow to also just focus on the critical path and help get you there. Being able to adjust the schedule and speak to it, I really think on those levels of the critical path, how you're going to set up, where you're going to be when this is, let's say, over, or this situation starts to fade for us, and how we're going to get there, what it's going to cost. Being able to continue to communicate that to the community is really important right now. We are seeing, I know on other calls, there's been talks about a little bit about how you market in these times, so I won't go too much into that, but we are still seeing the communities we're working with bringing on new members right now. So it's possible, but what we're seeing are the communities that can really articulate their path and how they're moving forward are able to continue to attract new members. Communities that can't quite articulate that solidly might get explorers that come and are interested, but they're probably going to sit on the sidelines till they really see that the community can pull through this. So this is why it's important that everyone be involved in that schedule and understanding of the budget at this point. It's really helpful. We're seeing. We've also seen some communities invite new explorers to sit in on the development calls if you're doing weekly or bi-weekly. We've seen that our Washington Commons project in Sacramento, they've invited the new explorers to be part of the development calls. I think it's been incredible for those new folks who are explorers to see what's going on. I would recommend that for all groups, to just open it up and say, be an observer. And so that they see that there is a core group that's working really hard to navigate these times. Some groups tend to bring their explorers in and keep them kind of over in the marketing area and not really bring them all the way in. And I would encourage you to bring them in and let them sit into a development meeting, because that'll get them engaged, and I think they'll see that that there's a lot going on. I know Katie's on here, but her number one, I'll just pass on because she's being quiet, but her number one advice, which I also second, is, you don't want to go dark at this time. Really, you've got to over communicate, if anything. So I know maybe even, particularly last week, and a lot of us were kind of feeling fatigue, like you just wanted to turn things off. And say, well, let's just sit back for a couple of weeks and, come back into the world in a couple of weeks. It's not a good strategy for communities. The minute you sort of press pause and pause the project, people think that it's over. That's it. And it's so much harder to restart. So it's okay to say, well, we need to, maybe if there's a couple areas of the project that aren't that critical path, and you want to say, well, let's just reschedule that meeting for May, but go ahead and get something on the calendar, right? Don't just drop it and say, well, we'll revisit it eventually. If you're going to delay something because people can't make the meeting, just go ahead and pick a new date, and then at least you're not stuck in that limbo. There's a real set time frame, and it can be communicated. It all goes back to this idea of communication, and you really can't over communicate at this time. So, those are the main pieces that we're seeing out there. We've actively been pricing 2 projects right now, where we've been getting basically live bids back from subs. We're starting to see savings in pricing, I'll say. subcontractors are still, they're kind of like everybody else, still trying to figure which way is up. So it's not quite, a super competitive world out there. But this week, I'd say even more than last week, folks are a little more concerned about will they have work in the next 6 months? What new projects might be out there. So one of the things that we did, we communicated immediately last week with all the general contractors that we are working with, or we're doing active pricing, saying, hey, just want to let you know, Washington Commons project is really strong. The community's all on board. We're moving forward. Don't put this off your desk. We want to keep pricing. Same thing. Adams Creek is still really active. The community is, on board. We're working hard. And so that goes to that communicating with your professional team. It really helps with your contractors too. We've noticed we've get a lot more attention from those general contractors because they're concerned, what will they have on the books when coming out of this? And so by communicating, it's important. We anticipate that we'll see, you spoke of earlier, we'll probably see some easing in construction pricing coming out of this. We never promised our communities that we'll see a big dip. Even in 2009, 2010, coming out of that, construction pricing did not significantly dip. It leveled out for a few years, which was great, but we probably won't see too much of a dip, at least in the labor market. Material is a little different. We've been pricing, this week we were pricing like appliances and plumbing fixtures and some of the materials, and we're beginning to see some more competitiveness out there. Most of those suppliers have closed their retail side, and they're looking for how they can get some orders in the door. So and this goes to another, this goes to a little bit of a tricky area, I think. It's not that we want to capitalize on people being in a down position. So we also don't want to be signing up, a subcontractor for a construction project who is barely, let's say, as a business, barely breathing, because the chances of them, even though they won your contract, of them coming out of it the other end alive are tricky. So it's going to be a time over the next year and a half to really make sure the general contractor and the subcontractors that are coming on to a project have the financial capability to finish the project and make it through. We're probably going to see, a few of the smaller general subs probably go out of business, just like, the small retail shops and commercial businesses or restaurants, they don't have the cash flow to weather, more than a month probably of being out of work, or their crews down. So I would really be cautious of setting up the right construction contracts with the right people coming out of this. There's a good chance of getting folks that go sideways, that just don't have the capability, don't come out in a healthy financial position. So I'll say one last thing. So we have a project that's hoping to break ground in about 2 months. And that project's in a financial position where we're looking to maybe procure some of the supplies early. And this is a tricky thing. It has to be done well, and really managed. But there's a concern if we're able to break ground, say this summer, we don't want to run into a situation where the supplies are coming short. So we're working with the key subcontractors to see if we can, go ahead and get some orders in through the supply houses, and move those items along. Potentially there's a room to negotiate, certain sort of pre-purchase savings for projects as well. So those are my main points. I'm open to questions, comments. You want me to elaborate in any area?
Thanks, Joren. That's great information. And we will open it up. You're welcome to put something in the chat, or I think we're few enough of us if you want to just unmute and speak your comments or questions. This is a great time to do that.
How much variation have you seen from location to location in terms of either pricing for housing or pricing for construction?
Well, I think it varies. What we're seeing, and I'll say, we have pricing going on in 3 different locations, all on the West Coast, and what we have, and the hard part is it's changed a lot in the last even 2 weeks. So, I got numbers last week up in Washington, and this week I was looking at numbers in Portland. So they're not quite apples to apples, because I think it's kind of week to week right now. I think that in general, we're not at the point, like I say, where we're really seeing significantly low numbers yet. Folks are still kind of using their estimating models that they've been working with up until now. I think they're just looking at maybe kind of the bottom line and saying, well, if I shaved an extra 5% off this number, maybe I'll get the job. We're not seeing real significant strategies yet. What we're starting to see is maybe some of the, like I say, on the supply side, material side, a little bit more competitiveness, but that's really just been this week in some of the numbers that we've seen come in. So it could change a little bit. Nobody's quite sure how many development projects in general, construction projects, are going to come out the other side of this just yet. So that's the tricky thing. It's different, and again, it's a new situation from 2008 because of where lending is. With interest rates so low, I think we know anyway, talking with some of the smaller developers in our area who have had kind of small to medium-sized projects, kind of rental housing size projects, or maybe they were like 10-unit apartment buildings that kind of had on the shelf, and they were just, the construction was too expensive the last 2 years to do it. Now they're seeing, well, the financing is dropping potentially to a point where it makes sense to maybe think about pulling those off the shelf and moving them into construction. So there's a potential, if rates stay low, that we won't see too much of a dip in construction. What we will see, new hotels probably not start, and some of the sort of service industry development type work going forward.
Just as a note on that, I've actually heard that a lot of hotel projects are about to start. I think that they've had stuff on the shelves, or they've been too busy or something, but in the hospitality sector, that in my company, we've seen a lot of those projects kind of come out in the last week. I've been surprised. Really?
Yeah. Our take on that is that we have yet to find a lender who's too excited about that yet. So you'll be curious whether if they have their loan in place or not, but we'll see. It'll be interesting where they are.
Joren, I have a question from the chat. Is it a good time to get a home mortgage or refinance one if you're at that stage?
Yeah. Yeah. If you've looked at residential mortgage rates, they're at an all-time low. They went down about 2 weeks ago, and then there were so many applications that they spiked back up, and now they're kind of down this week a little bit. But yeah, if somebody's not in a good mortgage rate, and you're still employed, I would refinance if I were there. It's hard though for our, developing communities, because you can't really get a home mortgage till we're nearly, lock it in till we're nearly complete. But
sounds good.
Can I?
Go ahead, Roger. Yeah.
Just wondering, have you been following the stuff that the bills that Congress has been passing, and is there anything in those that helps our situation?
We have been following them. And mostly what we are following them are, UDP, we own and operate quite a few buildings. And so we have a lot of commercial tenants. And so we're looking at it, how we can help our commercial tenants, whether they're a business or retail or restaurant or something, take advantage of that. So we have a fellow in our office who's been really following closely, so we can fit our tenants into the right, support package. We haven't seen anything that helps development yet. Potentially a progressive state like California might come out with something that there's been so many bills passed to push housing. I wouldn't be surprised if some sort of a state bill comes through that continues to help housing. But unfortunately, co-housers, you as a community get lumped into the development group, and developers usually don't, are kind of often seen as like they're like the guys profiting off everything, even though they really don't. There's you can ask Jim. There's not the profit in development is hard earned, but it's kind of it's not a business that usually gets a lot of support in these sort of bills, because we're not it just doesn't fit well. So I would say if something comes through, it'll probably be on the state level, and it'll be geared towards providing more housing. And the problem with co-housing, of course, is that most of those bills come through are really looking at deeply affordable options, and co-housing, it wants to be affordable at a market rate.
And our president's given developers a really bad name, so they can't have anything.
Yeah.
Well,
I was supposed to bring up the president.
It'd be interesting to hear Jim Leach weigh in here, since he's ridden through more recessions than any of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to weigh in. First of all, that was a great presentation you did, Joren. I hope we're going to save this one for a long time, because this is what new communities need to hear. And I really feel the same way as Joren. And I listened to a presentation by the economist in our business school at the University of Colorado today. And it was kind of enlightening in that he said that he thought that, as far as Colorado is concerned, that we might be back in as early as sometime in May or early June. That obviously, the good news is, as Joren pointed out, is that financing is really cheap right now. But he also pointed out that the country is running up this huge deficit, and it's been doing it year after year, and that the black swan's going to come home to roost in that area at some point. And way down the road, we might expect inflation and quite a bit higher interest rates. That to me means that this is even better time to move ahead and take advantage of the timing. I mean, I can't think of a better time for co-housing in the 20 plus years I've been involved in it. You got to really suck it up, and it's hard to do that right today, because we have another at least 8 weeks to 3 months to work through this. But that's a short time when you look at it in terms of the window it takes to build one of these projects. If you started your project today, you're going to move in maybe a year from now. A lot of them are at least 2 years away from moving in. Life is going to be different then, and hopefully we'll have figured some things out about how to deal with the world in a better way.
It's a little bit like in other investments. It's really hard to invest in the market when it's down at the bottom. But if you look back 6 months later, or a year later, you kind of kick yourself. And so you have to get beyond that initial knee-jerk reaction fear, and realize that, what Jim's saying, it's really has a huge potential to be a good time for communities to be coming out of this and building. They just have to, you know, together kind of manage that fear and move forward and be smart about it.
Do you have any particular words? I mean, it seems to me that development investment always has risk attached, and I know that I've heard all of you counsel communities these early investments are high risk investments. That risk feels bigger right now, I think, for a lot of people, and maybe more real. And I'm just wondering if you have particular words messaging around that.
Yeah, I think it's smart for communities. We were on the phone today with the Sacramento group. Katie and I were talking with them, and they're looking at their next level of member discounts. Most of you are probably familiar with that, you know, as early members coming in and reevaluating. You know, if you're a new member looking at the community today, it's a little different landscape than it was 4 weeks ago, let's say, or 5 weeks ago, right? So it's okay as a community to revisit that and say, maybe we want to go back and offer one of the early discounts that, you know, for a limited amount, that some of the early members who were also taking a big risk at that time, put that back on the table. Maybe it's okay as a community to do that, because it's, you know, early member discounts and the discount structure is as much about the community managing the marketing feel and in the emotional aspect of getting people to join. And so it's okay, because the financial landscape, the risk, and the emotions around it have changed a little bit. So I think it's wise for communities to have those discussions. Do we want to change the discount structure right now?
And it sounds like there may be enough savings in the finance realm to pay for some of those increased discounts, or that might be a way to think about it.
And it's also, you can think, the other way to think about it is if you can offer, let's say, a discount that brings 2 or 3 more members in during this time, that 2 or 3 members is really important. I mean, that's like new lifeblood into a community at this time. And if you spent in discounts, I don't know, 10 to 20 grand for that, at the, you know, those would be significant discounts. And it keeps the project moving on schedule. It's going to be more than made up in just carrying costs if the project had to delay because you were still marketing down the road, or you had to delay because your cash flow was thin and you couldn't, you know, you had to pause your architects. So it's money really well spent, and it's a good conversation to have and be smart about.
Sounds like a great tip. Are there other decisions like that the communities can be making and around budgets or offerings that would similarly tip the balance that way?
I think the other thing is this is sort of related to that, but if communities are having a cash call for development, you know, in the next couple months, I think they should be flexible, because what we're seeing too is, you know, this crisis has hit different people differently. So you might be readjusting what the minimum cash call requirement is, and just, you know, you don't want to lose somebody over this time because the community was inflexible about the minimum amount for the cash call. It's not worth it. It's better to sit down with that household and talk about an alternate strategy and see what can keep them on board and keep them involved. You know, I think that's the important thing to do. So that all goes through this communication and really keeping everybody in the loop and having a good dialogue. So, Jim, I don't know, maybe you have any other ideas?
Jim or Katie or anyone else have suggestions here?
Mm-hmm.
Well, for sure, the concept that Joren mentioned earlier, have a plan, work on your plan, and keep communicating. Like I said, this is a relatively short window in the world of development for the next 2 or 3 months, and the risk is going to shift fast, and opportunities will shift fast. So it's a great time. The hard part is what we're just talking about, is how do you get new members, how do you get enough members to show that you can actually close the project out. And I think that's going to be the challenge that groups have.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Katie, if you have other thoughts, feel free to chime right in, or if there are others with
Mhm.
expertise I may not know, we have just a couple minutes.
Questions?
No, I think, Joren, I really think that was, well, really great. And I do think, I think what I keep telling the communities over and over again is communicate. You got to communicate with each other, with your explorers, with your future prospects, and with your professionals. And one, you feel better when you talk to other people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, Joren's probably getting pretty tired out of communicating, but he'd like to communicate with his family. But it does, I think it's really helpful for the communities themselves is to, know that there's just as they talk it through and support each other in the process. So I think it's important. We are, we're learning once again all sorts of things about marketing. So really exciting time about, how do you do this virtually? How do you reach out? I really, every call I have every day with my client groups has got new information about how they're adapting and reaching out. So it's actually, I think it's great. You guys are doing these as a place to share that.
That's
That's
great.
an important role for the co-housing association too. The whole concept of co-housing, I think, is evolved out of this time we're in. At least I hope it will, because up until now it's been a very specialized product, and I don't think that that many people were attracted to it. I think people are rethinking about all of their values right now as they sit around and watch their computer for hours.
So I'm curious, given how much community there is going on right now in the existing communities, is that a selling point that can be utilized more in the future? And also as you're building, you're forming communities? Because there is a tremendous amount going on.
Yeah.
You're not sitting at home alone.
Yes, in fact, you guys dancing in the courtyard is going out to every developing group's Facebook feed out there. No, I think that's what I'm telling all of my clients is you need to tell the stories of community right now. It was interesting, my young staff person who's very representative of the millennials, most communities would like to attract. She was saying that Riley was saying that she was hearing from friends who were like, oh, wow, co-housing is probably not a great job right now. You've been laid off. And so in fact, we're really countering that to say, no, co-housing is a great place to be. And really telling stories that I'm hearing out of my own community and all of your communities. So that's actually, I have found historically, talking about crisis when you're not in a crisis is not good marketing. But when people, when we can't avoid it, when it's here, I think it's really important part of the story. So we're definitely.
That's great. And this probably is a good moment for me to just point out, as Jim and others have been saying, the value of what we are thinking of as a community of communities, and Co-Housing US coordinating that broader community and how much we have to offer one another. And one of the ways that we're doing that, for those of you who are in forming communities, who may not yet have heard about our community launch program, Karen and I really sat down and got some coordination from the board and thought about what are all the ways that we as an association can help forming communities in particular with what they need, and especially this piece about getting new members. And we put together a package that we're calling our community launch package. And what we like about it is it really has the sense of partnership, where we sort of say, okay, we're going to work together on this for a year, and you're going to contribute some financial support, which lets us keep doing what we do, and we're going to do everything we can to help launch you as a community. And we absolutely have space. We had kind of a flood for a little bit where I was a little overwhelmed, thrilled, but a little overloaded. And we worked through those and are at a space where we'd be really delighted to take on some more community partners in those forming communities in the community launch program. So I'll put a link in the chat here in a minute of the details of that, but would certainly encourage you to think about that, and feel free always to email or connect with me, and I can go through exactly what that means. But one of many ways that Coho US is trying to pull together the power of community on a much broader scale. And I think that's what we're mostly here for. So, Joren, we have just a few minutes. Do you have last words?
I think, it's the same points of develop a plan, talk to your professionals, communicate with your community, make sure everybody understands it. It's, we see this all the time, and I say I'm often guilty of this, is new members that come on don't always understand the budget the way, the development committee and folks that have been in from the beginning, and now's a good time to talk with folks that are coming on and educate them on it. And if that's tied to a schedule and a real strong plan of how you're going to come out of this and be in the right position to get under construction and, eventually move in, we are seeing people that are jumping on board. So it's a good time to make sure that those plans are in place. So, yeah.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
So
All right.
yeah, I've seen a note in the chat about ways that communities are sharing what they're doing and telling those stories. And I will say, as much as the association, we try very hard to share the stories, it's so much easier to share them if you tell them to us. So if there's anyone in your community who is at all inclined to write, even a paragraph, it doesn't have to be long, but I'm thrilled to put those together as blog posts and post those on our Facebook page and things like that. So whether you're a forming community or already living together, by all means, send me those stories. 'Cause I think
And if you're a Facebook poster, you can just go onto our Coho US, the co-housing group, and you can post a picture of yourselves dancing or sewing or whatever.
All right. Well, we are just at the end of our hour, and I think this is a good stopping point. So I'm going to wrap us up. A reminder, please, if you are not a regular contributor, or if this is a time you can put a little extra in, the association absolutely can use your financial support. Cohousing.org. There are donate buttons all over the place. This will be recorded, so if you have others who want to see it or you want to watch it again, we'll get the recording posted as soon as I can process it. Usually takes 2 or 3 days. And I think we'll have a summary to post as well. So all of that on the past web chats part of the website. And we will be here next week. And every Tuesday while this continues, Karen and I will be here talking about co-housing and the coronavirus and various aspects of that. Next week, I think we're planning to kind of do a check-in. We did an initial really broad ask, what's going on, what do you need? And it's been a month or so. And so we're going to check in with everybody again and see where folks are and what new things we've all learned about making things work in this time. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody,
Thank you very much.
Joren.
Yeah, thanks.
Excellent job.
Thanks, Joren.